Good morning, and welcome back to the Morning Endurance Call. I'm Keith Erwood, and this is a free, daily, 15-minute or less leadership ritual for executives, business owners, and preparedness professionals who want to build stronger businesses, think more clearly under pressure, and lead with more clarity in uncertain times. Each weekday morning, we spend a few minutes talking about what it really takes to build stronger businesses, stronger decision making, and stronger leadership in a world where disruption is no longer rare. Today's topic is this: why testing separates confidence from assumption. This matters because one of the biggest differences between organizations that feel prepared and organizations that are actually prepared is whether their preparedness has been tested. And that is an important distinction. A lot of businesses have plans. A lot of businesses have recovery targets. And a lot of businesses have documented assumptions. And a lot of businesses have people who say, we should be fine. But until those assumptions are challenged in a meaningful way, much of that confidence may be still theoretical. That is the issue. Because preparedness is easy to overestimate when it has not been tested. On paper, things often look cleaner. Roles seem clearer, timelines seem shorter, dependencies seem simpler, communication seems easier, recovery sounds more straightforward, and leadership alignment feels stronger. But real-world pressure has a way of revealing what documentation alone cannot. That is why testing matters. Testing helps the business move from belief to evidence. It helps answer questions like, can we actually do what we say we can do? Will the people involved know what to do? Are the recovery steps realistic? Are the assumptions valid? And do the timelines hold up? Will communication actually work? Are roles really clear? Are dependencies understood? And can leadership make decisions effectively under pressure? Those are not small questions. And they are exactly the kinds of questions that get exposed when preparedness is tested. This is one of the reasons, while I often say, testing is where preparedness stops being mostly intention and starts becoming more measurable capability. That is the value. Now I want to make something clear. When I say testing, I do not mean it has to be extreme, overly technical, or disruptive every time. Testing can take different forms. It can be a tabletop exercise. It can be a walkthrough. It can be a call tree test. It can be a technical recovery validation. It can be a scenario discussion. It can be a communications drill. It can be a failover exercise. It could be a leadership simulation. It can be a simple review of whether the business can actually perform a critical task under changed conditions. Also, there are ways to test in a technical environment your production without actually impacting current or production data or systems. We could talk about that one another time. But what matters most is not the label. What matters most is whether the organization is challenging assumptions in a meaningful way. That is the real point, because assumptions are everywhere in preparedness work. We assume the right people will be available at the right time. We assume they know their roles, and we assume the contact information we have is current. We assume access will work. We assume the run book is actually usable. We assume the vendor will respond. We assume the manual workaround is practical. We assume the recovery timeline is realistic. And we assume leadership will align quickly. We also assume communications will flow. And sometimes those assumptions are right. But many times testing reveals that one or more of those are weaker than expected. That is not really bad news, that is useful news, because it is far better to discover fragility during an exercise than a real disruption. That is why testing is so valuable. It does not exist to embarrass people. It exists to reveal reality, and reality is what preparedness needs. Now let's make this practical. Why does testing separate confidence from assumption? First, because testing reveals whether roles are truly clear. In many organizations, people believe responsibilities are understood, but once a scenario begins, confusion often shows up quickly. It shows up like who leads, who decides, who communicates, and who escalates, who owns technical response, and who owns business coordination, who informs leadership, and who contacts customers or vendors. If those things are unclear in practice, the business needs to know that. Testing often reveals that. Second, testing reveals whether recovery steps are usable. A run book may look good in a document, and a plan may sound complete, and a checklist may appear thorough. But can people actually use it under time pressure? Is it current? Is it clear? Does it reflect how the environment really works today? Are the instructions actionable? And are the dependencies accounted for? Testing answers those questions. Third, testing reveals whether timelines are credible. A recovery target may sound achievable during planning, but when real steps are walked through or technical processes exercised, delays often appear. You'll often see access issues, sequencing problems, approval bottlenecks, and outdated assumptions. You'll also see dependency conflicts, communications lag, and unexpected friction. That is why testing matters so much. It helps the organization see whether its timelines are real or optimistic. Fourth, testing reveals whether communication actually works. A lot of businesses assume communication will happen naturally during a disruption. But under pressure, communication often becomes one of the first problems. It shows up like people wait too long, messages are inconsistent, escalations are unclear, and stakeholders are missed. Updates will lack clarity. Leaders and teams operate from different understandings of the same situation. Testing helps expose those problems before the stakes are higher. And fifth, how leadership behaves under pressure. This is a major one. Testing is not just about systems and plans. It is also about leadership discipline. How quickly do leaders align? How well do they prioritize? Do they ask clear questions? And can they make decisions with incomplete information? Do they communicate with composure? Or do they create clarity or confusion? Do they escalate unnecessarily or not enough? And do they understand trade-offs? Those are all leadership capabilities, and they often become visible only once preparedness is challenged. That is why exercises and testing are so valuable at the executive level. They show whether the business has not only plans, but decision capability. Now, I want to emphasize something important here. Testing is not about proving perfection. It is about exposing reality early enough to improve it. A good test does not have to end with everything worked perfectly in order to be valuable. In fact, some of the most useful tests are the ones that reveal where things are still weak, because once those weaknesses are visible, they can be addressed. That is how preparedness matures, and this is why mature organizations do not treat testing as a one-time validation event. They treat it as a part of a learning cycle. Test, learn, adjust, improve, test again. That is how confidence becomes earned. Not because the organization assumes it is ready, but because it repeatedly challenges its readiness and strengthens what it finds. This connects closely to business continuity, IT disaster recovery, crisis management, and recovery strategy. A continuity plan is stronger when it has been exercised, and ITDR capability is more credible when technical recovery has been validated. A crisis management structure is more useful when leadership has practiced decision-making under pressure, and recovery strategy is more trustworthy when assumptions have been challenged and refined. Testing strengthens all of these. It also connects directly to recovery time objectives and maximum tolerable downtime, because those numbers only become meaningful when the business has some evidence that recovery can actually happen within the timeframes being discussed. Otherwise, they largely remain assumptions. And that connects directly to endurance, because endurance in business is the ability to continue operating, make sound decisions, recover intelligently, and keep moving forward under pressure over time. Testing supports endurance because it helps the business discover where capability is strong and where fragility still exists before disruption forces the issue. That is one of the most important things a business can do. An enduring business does not just say, we have a plan. It asks questions like, have we challenged it? Have we used it? Have we tested it? And what did we learn, and what still needs improving? That is the mindset. Preparedness gets stronger when it is tested. Leadership gets stronger when it is tested. And recovery gets stronger when it is tested. And confidence becomes more credible when it is supported by evidence. Now here's a very practical leadership question. What part of your preparedness are you most confident in, and what part of that confidence is based on actual testing rather than assumption? That is a powerful question. I also suggest you ask the following. What have we tested recently? What did we learn? Where did we experience friction? And what still feels uncertain? And what assumptions remain mostly unchallenged? And finally, what capability would concern us most if we had to rely on it tomorrow? Those are strong leadership questions, because they move the organization beyond comfort and toward real readiness. And that is the purpose of testing. Not just to check a box, not to satisfy a requirement, but to reveal the truth early enough that the business can improve before the next real disruption arrives. So here's today's leadership takeaway. Testing separates confidence from assumption because it reveals whether preparedness is truly usable, credible, and aligned with reality under pressure. That is the point. And here's today's question for you. If your organization had to rely on one of its most important preparedness capabilities tomorrow, would your confidence be based on evidence or mostly assumption? That's an important question, because the more honest the answer, the stronger your next preparedness decision can be. Thank you for joining me today on the Morning Endurance Call. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, please join our free endurance community. And that is where I'm sharing additional resources, tools, live learning, ongoing conversations for business owners, executives, and practitioners who want to build stronger businesses through preparedness, leadership, and endurance. The link will be below in the description. And tomorrow, I'm going to talk about why a crisis plan does not create crisis leadership. Because documents can support response, but leadership capability has to be built. Until then, think clearly, prepare deliberately, and lead with endurance. Thanks for joining. Bye now.